Hi there, welcome to our weekly rendezvous. This week on Get Me Right, there were many candid stories to be picked. Rahul Gandhi in the United States and is pushing an anti-India narrative. We discussed it on the daily debates, and it's been dissected threadbare. Other possible topic was the presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, which Harris seemed like winning, at least insofar as fence voters in swing states of the US are concerned. But again, enough real-time material available on that one. Plus, there's likely one more jousting match that's left between the two, so we can come to it later. There's a national security scare with railway tracks being targeted with boulders or theft of nuts and bolts, causing derailments. There's a pattern emerging which indicates that these are more than accidents. Investigations are on, and we are keeping a close watch on your behalf. What caught my attention this week instead was the first public appearance together of the two topmost spy chiefs, the heads of the CIA and the MI6. You of course know CIA is the external intelligence agency of the United States of America, and MI6 of the James Bond fame is for the United Kingdom. In this same week, two Chinese spies have been thrown out by the United States. So tighten your seat belts and let's have an eyes spies on this edition of Get Me Right. On September 7, past week, an unprecedented coming together happened. The director of the Central Intelligence Agency, William Burns, and the chief of MI6 of the UK, Richard Moore, appeared in a conclave talk show of the British business broadsheet Financial Times in London. While the two perhaps would be meeting often closed doors, this was the first time they were seen publicly together, making even the moderator Financial Times editor, Rula Khalaf, begin by asking, "Why are you even here?" The conversation was engaging and gave deep insights into what's going on in the minds of the geopolitical game shapers, not only in the US and UK, but the larger West, given the leadership position the two effectively occupy. The 40 minutes conversation had a clear Russia overhang, with the ongoing war in Europe understandably occupying the mind space of the public that side of the Suez. Burns began by showcasing advanced intelligence on Russia's war plans in Ukraine, which he said they came to know in the fall of 2021, good 5 to 6 months before Putin's special military operation rolled out in February of 2022, as proof of how closely the two agencies work. I was wondering while watching, what was done to stop the war, if they had such advanced information? Well, it seems the only thing West did was to arm the Ukrainians to take on Putin. Did the spy master slip in a moral failing of the West in not doing his stuff to stop the war? We won't know. After all, wars are about values, and the West believes the war in Ukraine is about standing up to principles of democracy against a despotic ruler in Putin. While on values, there was a lot of virtue signaling on how the collaboration between the CIA and MI6 and other Western Bloc nations is for a greater good, while the sharing of objectives between Russia, China, Iran, and Korea is about a dark ether.
It is nonetheless troubling. I mean, we see the way in which, China and Russia, Russia, Iran, Russia, North Korea are working together. There are two-way streets, the defense partnerships. It imposes a real danger on innocent Ukrainian civilians, but it also poses danger, because it's a two-way street, to friends and partners in the Middle East, too, in the case of Russia and Iran.
Burns also slipped in that sometime in the winter of 2022, faced with some saber-rattling by Putin on the use of tactical nukes in the war, he made a quiet outreach to his Russian counterpart and sorted it out. Just a hint there, that if we have not seen an escalation in that direction, it could be because the United States did something in a quid pro quo. It was, however, left unsaid. If you ask me to make an informed guess, I would say maybe the Americans told the Russians that while they would arm Ukraine to the teeth to fight them, it would still be below a threshold. If you see the nature of aid being given to Kiev with the ration release of both arms and cash, you would get what I mean. Have you noticed, for example, the absence of big long-range missiles targeting Russian territory from the Ukrainian side? How a great majority of pictures of war are about Ukrainians using drones and air bombings with occasional reach of Moscow. Like who stops Americans from supplying the Patriot missiles and the F-16s to Kiev? The latest Kursk adventure, in which Ukraine has occupied some Russian real estate for the first time, also came in the conversation, with Moore wondering out loud for how long the Ukrainian forces would be able to hang on to it. I should quote him. It's typically audacious and bold on the part of the Ukrainians to go into Kursk, though I'm not sure how long they would be able to hang on there, unquote.
It's typically audacious and bold on the part of the Ukrainians to try and change the game.
Let me read a little more of the Western strategic mind for you, picking up from this conversation. Both Burns and Moore agreed that they had no proof that Putin was weakened even a wee bit in the last 2.5 years of the war. It is one of the clearest admissions right there at the top of Western security establishment that all the sanctions regime that was put in place and all the support to Ukraine has not translated into throttling or containing Russia in the manner as the West would have wanted. Moore mentioned with little exasperation how they were working to make sure that Russia did not send cargo ships of oil to get money and fund war. Obviously, it's not working. Burns said that he had met with his Chinese counterpart twice in the last 1 year, impressing upon them that their supply of dual-use technology was helping Moscow sustain its war. But to what end?
Well, I mean, I'd say two things. First, I don't think either of us see direct evidence today, as we sit here, of the provision of weapons and munitions from China to Russia for use in the war effort in Ukraine. But we see lots of things just short of that, as Richard said, in terms of dual-use items, the kind of things that have enabled Putin over the course of the last 18 months or so to significantly rebuild his defense industrial base. And that poses a real danger.
The conversation then touched the other hotspot geography in the present, the Middle East, where it seems, reading between the lines of what the two spy masters said, particularly the CIA chief, that there might be a window opening soon of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Burns said it with a lot of heart to applause. Listen in.
I cannot sit here today with all of you and say that we're going to succeed in that. I cannot tell you how close we are right now. It is a fact that if you look at the written text, 90% of the paragraphs have been agreed to, but in any negotiation I've been involved in, the last 10% is the last 10% for a reason, because it's the hardest part to do. So all I can say is three things. First, we will continue to work as hard as we can with the other mediators on this, because there's no good alternative to getting to that ceasefire and the release of hostages.
I always wonder if none of the geostrategic objectives are being achieved, shouldn't there be a rethink? There was no sign. Making all its moves on the chessboard driven by Putin hate, the West has effectively landed Moscow in the warm embrace of Beijing. The two spy masters wondered aloud if, given the historical mistrust between China and Russia, the Russians at some stage would chaffe at the idea of being junior partners of China. Is that waiting game the strategy of the West on China, really? That brings me to the real meat in the conversation, when the elephant in the room got discussed, China. The CIA chief mentioned how Beijing is their topmost priority now, and is going to be so for a decade and more to come. The China-oriented bit of CIA budget has ballooned 3 times, or grown 300% over the last 3 years alone, and now constitutes 1/5 or 20% of the agency's overall budget. Of the 12 buildings that make up the CIA headquarters at Langley, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., One full building is dedicated to China operations. China is the only country that has a single country mission center of CIA in that complex. Gives you some idea of the kind of priority China has become. On Thursday, that's September 12, a former CIA agent, Alexander Yok-Ching Ma, who was used by the agency for spying on China and went rogue midway to spy for China instead, was sentenced to a 10-year jail term. 3 days before that, or September 9, head of a Washington-based think tank was arrested and is all set to be extradited on charges of being an unregistered agent of China. That's diplomacies for spying. Gol Luft headed the Institute for the Analysis of Global Security and was indicted for bribing a high-ranking American official on behalf of his principals in Beijing in 2016, as also brokering a weapons deal and purchase of Iranian oil. On September 3, US law enforcement agencies arrested Linda Sun, a former deputy chief of staff to the governor of the New York State, Kathy Hochul, on charges of spying for China. She is a naturalized US citizen, meaning she was born in China and migrated to the United States, and yet rose through the ranks to become important enough to influence US policy towards China. The indictment that I accessed mentions how Sun, along with her husband, engaged in numerous political activities in China's interest, including blocking representatives of the Taiwanese government from having access to the governor's office, changing New York State's messaging around issues of importance to China, and obtaining governor's office proclamations for China without proper authorization, among others. In return for these favors, the couple is said to have received substantial economic benefits from the Chinese government, including millions of dollars, travel benefits, event tickets, and more. They laundered this money to buy a home in Long Island worth millions of dollars and another condominium in Hawaii, plus many luxury automobiles, the indictment says. All this was being coordinated from the Chinese consulate in New York. Sun is not the only alleged Chinese operative in New York's political orbit who has been arrested for their involvement in espionage or influence activities. Last year, another Chinese national, Lu Jianwang, was arrested with a long history of mingling with Democratic New York Representative Grace Meng, who incidentally had Sun also working for her briefly. Liu was allegedly helping operate an illegal Chinese police station in New York City, which the FBI raided and was eventually shuttered. You would recall reports through much of 2022 and 2023 of Chinese police stations working across Europe and the Americas, their job to spy on known critics of the Chinese Communist government, among other things, and directly report to the Chinese authorities in Beijing. The indictment of Sun also says that when she met key groups identified with the United Front Work Department, the organization that oversees Chinese intelligence gathering around the world, following these developments and amidst controversy surrounding her office, New York Governor Hochul even recommended to the US State Department that it expel China's Consul General in New York, Huang Ping. The diplomat apparently completed his 3-year tenure last month and hence perhaps evaded any precipitate American action. Groomed in China before migrating to the United States, Sun's ability to go undetected for a good decade shows the sophistication that the Chinese intelligence operations have achieved. One wonders what the US law enforcement is doing. Obviously, Americans have a record of Chinese buying influence in the American establishment. Imagine how deep the tentacles are of the Chinese now in the United States. There is some evidence that the Democrats might have been a little lax or indulgent towards China, because in 2020, on a mere suspicion of espionage and theft of trade secrets, the Trump administration had shut down the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas. Jittery Chinese staff indulged in burning of some documents in the compound, clearly giving away evidence of wrongdoing which had to be destroyed. Coincidentally, this week is being marked as the China Week on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., aimed at passing legislations that put guardrails on U.S. security and economy against Chinese threats. The session in the U.S. House of Congress on the Capitol would see over 24 bills piloted and passed that aim to limit the role of Chinese companies, corporations, organizations to do business in the United States that could threaten American national security in any manner, from the U.S. home territory to the Taiwan Strait, as one U.S. congressman put it.
I want to thank Speaker Johnson and the Republican leadership for bringing over 24 bills on U.S.-China competition while tackling CCP aggression head-on from the American heartland to the Taiwan Strait. The Speaker has been supportive of the committee's work, and I'm thankful for his vote of confidence in pledging to continue the committee in the next Congress. Chairman McCall, as well as some of the other standing committees. And we're here today because the Chinese Communist Party presents the greatest threat to American values and American national security in our lifetime. But we can stand up to the CCP by defending our values and reducing the party's leverage over the United States. This week, Congress will take action to secure our supply chains, from electric vehicle batteries to healthcare to critical infrastructure. The Chinese Communist Party wants to make us dependent on companies subject to its direction.
One of them is the Protecting American Agriculture from Foreign Adversaries Act. The debate on this bill observed how Chinese corporations linked to the Chinese Communist Party have acquired thousands of acres of American farmland across the U.S., and how many of these land parcels happen to be near American military bases or critical infrastructure.
I rise in support of the Protecting American Agriculture from Foreign Adversaries Act, and I'd like to thank Representative Newhouse for his continued leadership on this issue. I'm proud to have helped introduce this important piece of legislation to protect our food supply from foreign adversaries like Communist China. China does continue to buy up American farmland at an alarming rate. They are aiming to gain control of our food and fuel supply chains.
Some of the other bills already passed in this China-focused session are Economic Espionage Prevention Act, Countering Chinese Drones Act, and Restrictions on Confucius Institutes Act. Chairman of the Select Committee on Chinese Communist Party in the U.S. Congress, John Mulenar, while supporting the bill, moved by Texas Congressman August Pfluger, said the CCP uses Confucius Institutes as a vehicle to promote a distorted picture of China and provide American universities with a financial incentive to stay in the party's good graces. We cannot allow American taxpayer dollars to support universities that allow the presence of these institutes to influence and manipulate their students, unquote. That, by the way, reminds me of Chinese spy network closer home. In 2015, in response to a question in Parliament, India's Ministry of External Affairs informed how the Chinese were operating dozens of China study centers in Nepal, many of them in the Terai region of Nepal's border with India. But more on that some other time. Clearly, Americans are coming to grips with the scale of Chinese infiltration and acting post-haste to tackle it. In a way, they have themselves to blame. With rose-tinted glasses on its eyes in the 1990s, the United States thought that its support in integrating the Chinese communist regime into the international mainstream would earn it an eternal gratitude of Beijing. The naivete, in fact, went all the way back to Nixon and Kissinger in 1970s. We know that bit of history, of how Americans thought they could counter Russia with China and also get a cheap shop floor for their consumerism-oriented economy in the bargain. Now the dragon is breathing fire, and the Americans are running to cover their house. Brings me back to the CIA MI6 conversation. Remember, I mentioned how the top spy masters think rather wistfully that at some stage Moscow would grudge Chinese hegemony in the arrangement. My question is, why put Russia in the Chinese ark in the first place, which the West has done with its blind hatred for Putin guiding its conduct? And that's where India comes in. Just look at the hectoring we have faced in Western capitals over the last 2 years for buying Russian oil. Our accent on following an independent foreign policy that did not ditch an old friendship with Moscow, at the same time providing humanitarian aid to Kiev, got dissed. But look at how things have turned out. Prime Minister Narendra Modi became the only leader from the global south and from the non-Western world to visit Kiev last month. If a Modi peace plan is firming up, which could be acceptable to both Russia and Ukraine, it's because India listened to both the sides. Here, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar this week, he was speaking with German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock by his side in Berlin.
When there is a discussion, we also think it is essential to have Russia in it. Otherwise, the discussions don't, gain further movement. And where India is concerned, I think it's up to what the two parties want. We continuously talk to them. In fact, perhaps you're aware that our national security advisor just went to Moscow in the last few days. So that's really what the state of play is.
One peace summit that has happened during the ongoing war in Switzerland had no presence of Russia. Turkey, that brokered a grain deal between the two warring sides, is supplying weapons to Ukraine. China is fully backing Russia with no Ukraine connect. And the West, well, less said the better. Hope you have better understanding of the Western strategic thought and their worldview today. Thanks for watching.